What happens when a political figure loses the presidency but gains, well, something like near absolute ideological control over his party?
It's a fascinating question.
Every single move by every rival, from speeches to fundraising, even to policy, it has to first answer to the shadow of that former leader.
And that isn't just a theory. That is the fundamental strategic challenge described in David M. Drucker's book, In Trump's Shadow, The Battle for 2024 and the Future of the GOP.
We're diving into that material today, and we're actually doing something a little special for you. We want you to discover a new, in-depth approach to book coverage with this extended summary.
That's right. Unlike our previous review, which was more of a focused analysis, this feature delivers a really comprehensive overview. We're tracing the intellectual roots, the key arguments, and the real-world impact of the subject.
The goal is for you to feel like you've gotten the core of the book, all the critical takeaways, but in a fraction of the time. So if you appreciate this expanded format, if you find it helpful, please let us know. Your feedback absolutely helps shape future content.
It really does. And Drucker's book is just a masterful blend of reported narrative, some amazing insider campaign detail, and profile-driven analysis. It was released after the 2020 election and the January 6 attack.
A moment when the Republican Party was intensely debating where to go next.
Exactly. Whether to embrace or refine or maybe finally move past the Trump era.
And the book's core thesis is just inescapable. Donald Trump remains the dominant reference point within the GOP, even when he isn't on the ballot.
He dictates everything.
The strategy, the message for every single rival. He forces everyone from Mike Pence and Nikki Haley to Ted Cruz and Ron DeSantis to navigate this single, powerful, political, magnetic field.
It's a compelling, high-stakes drama. And to make sure you get the most comprehensive, detailed view of this material, just remember that you are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's Notebook LM for deeper, more dynamic book summaries.
So let's jump into the context of the shadow, because the story really begins right after the 2020 defeat.
Drucker frames that immediate post-election period as the end of the beginning. Trump's 4 years had totally redefined the party.
Shifting it from traditional fiscal conservatism to more of a populist nationalism.
Right, but his defeat left the future unresolved. For every ambitious Republican, the calculation was, well, it was simple but agonizing. Will Trump run again in 2024? And if he does, is there any space left for me?
That calculus must have forced a frantic, maybe even contradictory, scramble for positioning?
It did. The book details what Drucker calls the political tightrope. He has a chapter titled Camelback, which refers to this intense maneuvering by senior Republicans.
Trying to stay close enough to Trump to keep the base happy, but also protecting their own future viability if he stepped aside.
Precisely.
So how did that tightrope walk actually manifest? What were the specific actions they were taking?
It wasn't about big, grand pronouncements. It was all about subtle signaling. Drucker describes these concrete tactics. Carefully planned trips to early primary states like Iowa and New Hampshire.
Places where they could speak at local GOP dinners or appear on conservative talk radio.
And signal ambition without ever declaring war on Trump. They held behind-the-scenes conversations with major donors, reassuring them of their own viability while offering only these oblique, coded criticisms of the 2020 election results.
So never provoking the former president directly.
Never. But showing the establishment they hadn't, so to speak, lost their minds. It was a strategy defined entirely by public loyalty and private distance.
That sounds exhausting, a sustained exercise in political ambiguity. But this wasn't just about politicians in Washington, was it? It was driven by the base.
Absolutely. Drucker spends a lot of time on what he calls our discontent, the grassroots anger and alienation that propelled Trump in the first place. This is the energy any future nominee simply must channel.
And the book shows how they did that.
It does. It examines town halls, conservative conferences like CPAC, and activist networks. Figures like Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley were very successful at positioning themselves not as traditional Republicans, but as champions of this intensely discontented base.
They adopted the populist confrontational style.
Yes, challenging institutions like the media, universities, big tech. But they used their established political brands to give that anger a policy voice. Specifically on issues like big tech censorship or immigration enforcement.
So what you have is a Republican Party that isn't just split, it's fractured. You've got traditional conservatives, populist nationalists, evangelicals, and establishment figures all in one tent.
The environment Drucker describes is one of deep cultural polarization and institutional distrust. The whole drama plays out between Washington, D.C., the informal but highly influential court at Mar-a-Lago, and those crucial early primary states.
That complexity, I imagine, leads directly into the idea that contenders couldn't just run a single campaign.
They couldn't. They had to carve out these specialized lanes, each one trying to capture a distinct piece of this fragmented post-Trump coalition.
And all without alienating the central figure himself.
That was the constant challenge.
So let's unpack those contender archetypes. We can start with the faith-based approach. The born-again, or evangelical lane. This is a massive voting bloc that Trump energized.
And it's where politicians with deep evangelical ties, especially Mike Pence, position themselves. Pence's strategy, as Drucker details it, was to go back to his foundational relationships.
Cultivating connections with pastors, religious media, faith-based activists.
He did. He emphasized traditional social conservative issues like abortion and religious liberty, and this is crucial. He framed these efforts as maintaining the momentum that the Trump administration had started.
So he was offering a different moral tone, but with the same policy goals.
Exactly. He wanted to show the faith community that he was the most reliable executor of their shared agenda. It provided a sense of continuity.
Okay, so that's one lane. What about the politicians who just seemed wired for the race no matter the circumstances? The born-to-run group.
Right, the ambitious younger senators and governors. We're talking about figures like Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, and Tom Cotton.
How does Drucker portray them?
As figures who are just naturally inclined toward presidential bids, their pre-campaign actions were highly detailed, very professional. They knew they couldn't just wait for permission.
So what were they doing?
The book details their specific travel itineraries to key states, the speeches they gave at influential conservative summits, and crucially, their policy positioning focused heavily on China and national security areas where they could distinguish themselves as traditional hawks and align with the public's shift toward a more confrontational foreign policy.
A shift Trump helped start.
Right. So they were crafting resumes to appeal to both the donor class and the populist base at the same time, trying to assemble a winning, overlapping coalition.
So one lane is built on faith and loyalty, another on pure ambition and policy credentials. Then you have this third specialized category, the former administration official, the pomp and circumstance lane.
Or the experienced air lane. This focused on high-profile former cabinet officials, with Mike Pompeo being the main example.
And Pompeo's challenge was unique, wasn't it? He had to leverage his foreign policy credentials as Secretary of State, but without sounding like a return to the pre-Trump establishment.
A very thin line to walk. Drucker outlines how Pompeo did this by maintaining a massive media presence, strong ties to donors, and connections to think tanks. He pitched himself as the experienced heir who could execute the America First agenda effectively, soberly.
His speeches, I recall, often emphasized national security threats like China.
But always within the context of the agenda Trump created. The book details these symbolic soft campaign launches, often a foreign trip or a major policy speech, all designed to project seriousness and experience.
It's all about this incredibly calculated positioning. Before we move into the critical turning points the book addresses, this seems like a good moment to mention Mindful Moments.
Our YouTube channel.
Right, it offers AI book analysis, summaries, and critiques. It's a great resource for inspiring reflection and rational thought.
And I'd add, it's also really valuable for aspiring authors looking to study narrative structure. You can see how a writer like Drucker weaves these disparate political profiles into a single compelling narrative thread.
And that narrative thread inevitably leads us to the most defining event the book covers.
The chapter titled, That Day.
January 6, 2021. Drucker presents this as the fundamental crucible, the event that shaped the GOP's internal struggles and forced every potential 2024 hopeful to make a choice.
A choice that would define their future standing. The book vividly details the immediate political fallout. The response by Republicans, from Mike Pence all the way to congressional leaders, became the single most important factor.
Whether to condemn it, minimize it, or rationalize it.
And each choice had huge risks. If they condemned it, they risked alienating the passionately loyal Trump base. If they minimized it, they risked losing the broader electorate and traditional suburban Republican voters.
Drucker focuses a lot on the pressure Mike Pence was under.
He does. The book dedicates significant space to the incredible pressure he faced during the electoral vote certification process, making his decision a key factor in his political viability. It was a loyalty test, and the book shows how so many Republicans tried to find the narrowest possible path around it.
While some were forced into a corner by that day, others were already practicing a different kind of balancing act, the Southern balancer, as Drucker calls it.
The chapter is titled, Bless Your Heart. This is the lane really occupied by figures like Nikki Haley.
Her history with Trump is particularly complex.
It is, marked by periods of pretty fierce criticism, followed by periods of fierce alignment. Drucker describes her strategy as an attempt to balance that history. She meticulously focuses on donor outreach and messaging designed to maintain credibility with suburban and establishment Republicans.
The group often most alienated by the post-2020 turmoil.
Exactly. But at the same time, she tries to appeal to pro-Trump voters nationally and in her home base of South Carolina, which is the crucial first primary state in the South.
So it's a balancing act of nuance, criticizing the manner of Trump's actions, perhaps, without attacking the substance of his policies.
It's exquisite political tailoring. And then we arrive at the final and maybe most potent contender archetype, the potential direct challenger.
Highlighted in the chapter Florida Man, focusing on Governor Ron DeSantis.
Right. DeSantis is portrayed by Drucker as someone who immediately recognized the energy of the Trump base and sought to apply it not just to rhetoric, but to actual governing.
The book details his aggressive culture war governance.
It does. The legislative pushes, the public fights with critics, his national media strategy. It looks exactly like a fully operational pre-presidential campaign. He used his executive power to channel that populist energy on issues like critical race theory and COVID-19 mandates.
Creating an entirely separate but ideologically aligned political brand.
And that's the strategic masterstroke Drucker highlights. DeSantis managed to align himself with the spirit of Trumpism without necessarily needing Trump's direct endorsement.
But the fascinating part is the unique political ecosystem created by having both DeSantis and Trump residing in Florida.
And Drucker raises that key question, which was left unanswered when the book was published, of how these two major figures, both commanding the same populist energy, might coexist or eventually collide.
Beyond the main contenders, the book also notes the high visibility of Trump family members.
Particularly Donald Trump Jr. His role is critical. He acts as a kind of populist torchbearer, using rallies and social media to maintain constant ties to the activists and donors who share that populist style.
Reinforcing his father's brand while also cultivating his own potential network.
Exactly. It ensures the brand extends well beyond his father's immediate political activities.
So when you pull it all together, the structural summary of this book isn't theoretical at all. It's grounded in the physical reality of politics.
It really is. Drucker relies on concrete political objects, institutions, and practices, endorsements, legislative fights, the informal court at Mar-a-Lago, specific state-level policies, to illustrate the complex factions and shifting alliances of this Game of Thrones-like contest for power, where loyalty, ambition, and policy are the currency.
That's the core takeaway. The battle for the future of the GOP is defined entirely by these calculations of loyalty to the past and viability for the future. And it's all conducted within the unyielding magnetic field of the party's dominant figure.
And his influence remains resolute, even after leaving the White House.
Absolutely. The book ends not with a resolution, but with a party still in fundamental flux, locked in this cycle of homage and ambition.
Which brings up an important question for you, our listener, to consider. How does a political party innovate or move forward when its foundational structure is still organized not around a set of principles or a platform, but around the actions and intentions of a single powerful individual?
A profound thought, and a challenge that continues to shape American politics today. If you want to dive even deeper into this material, click the link on screen for the in-depth book critique. Subscribe, share, purchase via the link, and think rationally.
See the many genre-based book podcasts at Mindful Moments. Subscribe and nourish your mind on the go.